Before we begin the meeting, let me first acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. The place that we normally meet is on campus, but everybody will be meeting in different places. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which you are, and pay their respects to their elders past, present and future as well. So today is an interesting one, and we're very lucky to have someone who has a connection to many different places around many different disciplines, and definitely to the University of Sydney. So Bronwyn Darlington, I won't go through the full bio, but has more than 25 years of industry experience in a variety of sectors. And I think the thing that's most interesting to me is the interdisciplinary nature of the work that she does. So while she's coordinated and taught a number of units of study in the business school, and in particular in the Global Executive MBA, I think it's really interesting that she works across so many different disciplines. So without giving too much away, I think I'll hand it over now, and then you can tell us about this as you go. So please take it away, Bronwyn.
Thanks, Adam. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me at this formal, informal forum. I hope that the technology holds out. I actually live on a farm outside of Canberra, so occasionally there may be strange sounds in the background, which if it's not the dogs, it's the cows or it's something else. So I'm really keen for you to interrupt me anytime. That would, I'd much prefer this was a dynamic conversation. I also just want to thank you all for coming. Just note that Anne Cherry, who you might see the name pop up there, Anne is working with me on this. She's going down endless rabbit holes of information to help put together what we're trying to do here. So the approach I wanted to take first was just to give you a bit of background as to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. One of the things that occurred to me, particularly with the Royal Commission into Ageing last year, was that we're at a period of time where there is a real convergence with need and changing expectations in the community. We have a profile of a sector that is particularly around health, but also around ageing, which we simply can't continue on as normal. But my area of focus was really looking at what is the interaction and the convergence between technology and sectors that are going to be highly disrupted. So with this all coming together, it made me really think about the work that is about technology development and how it really relates to solving problems around health and particularly around aging. And one of the reasons that this is really important for me is that, and I'm hoping my screen works, that I am one of those people who has this very broad view of life. And as Adam said, I do a lot that's really interdisciplinary. I have an agricultural technology company, and I explained to Jack and Adam that if I'm a bit flustered, it's because I've just left a cattle yards where I've jumped over a fence while CSIRO is collecting breath on some of our cows because we work with nanotechnology. That's really also about animal health, but I'm also very much involved from the consumer point of view. So it's each device that I develop in the agricultural tech space or now in the medtech space is really looking at the problem from the consumer point of view. And for me, with the convergence of a whole pile of issues around aging, it really comes this idea about healthspan and technology that can solve that problem. And I know that I'm speaking to people who have way more experience in all sorts of deep dives in these aspects. So I thought I'd just frame for you what I mean when I'm talking about health span. So really the period of life that you without chronic disease or multiple morbidities. We know that for the period of time that you're in aged care or you are dealing with morbidities is actually between 15 and 30% of your life, depending on your socioeconomic position. And that research is showing that this is actually going to change we're going to live longer, but the key factor that is most important in what I'm trying to frame is that the gap that is between what is healthy now and what lifespan will be needs to be not just extended, but look at health and healthiness. And so the term health span is something that I'm sure many are familiar with, but it's just a distinction that rather than lifespan or looking at technologies that just look at lifespan. But it's also, particularly for me, a focus that allows me to go, well, actually, from a consumer or user point of view, our health is very knowable and very self-referential. And so I've been looking at technology development within that framework that looks at it, well, how does it come from my experience of this? Not just simply the objective aspect of extending a life, because we often find it harder to perceive further out, as we all know, and looking at, well, what is this area in the middle and how will technology affect that? So my presentation and my discussion today is going to sort of blend two different stories. One is my research and theorizing around this, which is really looking at the consumer behavior side, but really around identity and age-related identity and how that affects the take-up of healthspan related technologies and the engagement with healthier behaviors. And then it's to move into what I'm trying to develop, which is to solve a problem that is there's so much new technology occurring. But when I look at this and speak to both consumers as individuals, but particularly large buyers of health services, such as large health insurers, life insurers, aged care facilities, their confusion is, one, we know lots is coming, but we don't know how to access it. So I'm trying to look at building what is this sort of platform marketplace that we can do to actually make this quicker and more effective, and really looking at this as a new way to get translational research into consumers' hands more quickly. And so I'm really keen to get your feedback on that. So that's sort of the cycle journey, and I really am happy for you to wave at me, ask me questions. I can't see the notes bit while I'm showing my screen, but just Adam's going to just put his hand up or do something really obvious. Yeah, that thumbs up, that's right, I can do that. To help interrupt me, which should be great. So for me, the first part of this story comes from the fact that I have a view based on the fact that this is me with my 6-year-old grandson, Atticus. Now, when I'm eating ice cream with Addie, I'm not thinking of myself as a grandma like I did with my grandmother, who at my own age, I always thought, gee, she's pretty old. My self-perceived age when I'm with my grandson is a completely different paradigm. And my identity actually seems to morph in my mind when I'm with him. I mean, I ride skateboards with Addie. I've got 8 grandchildren. And so for me, this whole concept of identity is, in my own research, is much more fluid. But I've begun to apply that, thinking about that as it comes to age. And the reason this is important is because it affects my behavior and my choices in behavior. And being an early adopter of technology, it's steered me in a way of looking at and working with and adopting new technologies that look at healthspan. And you'll see where that leads to. But what it's also done is it's spun me back into my PhD work and my behavioral economics and consumer psychology work to go, well, look, if I'm having this experience of a variation in identity depending on what frame I'm in, if it's manipulatable, if it's changeable and I'm acting differently, and to be honest, I'm analysing myself more to look at the health choices I might make with that. And if I look at that with others, I'm really keen on doing more research to understand that, not just the theory, but how this would actually affect the take-up of new technologies and new behaviours that we need to extend health span. So what I'm just going to quickly do is go, my thesis and academic work, I'm a late career researcher rather than an early career researcher, and late career, and I had a few of them before I did all this. But everything I've done is really very much focused around human behaviour. And my area of expertise in this is moral identity theory. So my thesis was about one good deed deserves another, how moral identity and positive affect mediate the effect of costiness on pro-social consumer behaviour. Really what this was looking at, I do experimental works or quant stuff. If we manipulate the first behaviour and it has a relationship with costiness, how consistent will people be in being pro-social? And in many ways, there is this relationship with this to age and health behaviours, because they're not immediately affect you necessarily. We all have varying levels of whether it's a moral identity versus, for me now, looking at age identity, and to understand what the sort of a mediator model might be. So what I found was that if it's a meaningful cost in an altruism sense, so if you do something that's meaningfully costly, it elevates your sense of moral identity, and that actually has an effect on your subsequent pro-social behaviour. You're more likely to be consistent, and it's manipulatable. The thing I also found was if you felt happy about the sacrifice you made in being a good person, not only were you consistently continuing with that, but you're likely to increase the level to which you are altruistic. So in my mind, I've gone, okay, this is an area I have deep knowledge about and I understand. So how could that model potentially work when we look at self-perceived age identity? And is there a mediation model that could actually be effective here? Because what I understand when I talk to the head of health of Bupa, or I talk to Ality and other aged care providers, there's plenty coming down the line, but it's pretty hard to show the evidence of what will actually work. So my area then, what I did before, in previous research, I'm now doing with this, and I've done quite a bit, is look at nudge theory, which I'm sure plenty of you are all really aware of, and to understand how would nudge theory relate to manipulatable self-perceived age identity sort of theory. And how would that be important in getting people to, in their 45 and up, in the years where we need to help people adopt new behaviours, actually be useful in being able to trigger a more consistent, healthy behaviours, and what should that look like, and how can we do that? And the reason this relates to the idea of setting up an online market platform is because much of this is easier to do and easier to measure when you're looking at online, and being able to set up experimental work that actually looks at not just what people will say, but what they will actually do, and able to measure the effect. And with the convergence with data, and being, data is new gold, working with, which is what we're starting to do with big insurers and those and life insurers as well, is to be able to look at how can we begin to look at these relationships and measure the effect. So I'm going back to the basics of Theory 101 to say, well, I'd like to start with doing research. I'm doing research around this. I'd love to get people's thoughts about the principle, that the theory of self-perceived age identity and how that would affect the health span related behavior. Because what we want is consistency, but now we have an opportunity with new technologies coming on board to bring those two things together. So that's the theory piece in what I'm trying to look at. But underneath that really is, it's all because that's my mum and I. She's in her 80s and she acts just like a younger person constantly, but my health span needs to match my lifespan. And if I'm wanting to understand some of the mechanics around the decision-making of behavior change, I really want my mum, my kids, and my grandkids to live happier and healthier for longer. And so I can learn about how the theory works and look at how we can nudge people to do that. But one of the gaps that I continually came up against is the ease of access to the new technologies and new research and information that would give us all access to what that is. So if I'm looking at design, decision making, the decision making is only effective when there's an actual choice to make. And right now there is, in my mind, a tsunami of research and tech development that is coming up over the hill, ready to hit the market effectively and to be useful for consumers. But there is this friction in being able to make that available to people. And that's certainly the feedback I'm getting from those who would be large consumers of health technologies and who have a vested interest in doing so. So from a market point of view, a life insurer, for example, really what they want to be able to use new technologies for that keep people healthier for longer, not just, the whack-a-mole morbidity thing. Oh my God, you're a bit sick here. We'll fix that. We'll fix that. We'll fix that. Is because if they are getting life insurance premiums and they don't have to pay out, there's an economic incentive to keep you healthier for longer. The longer you are healthy, the longer you don't claim, the more important this is. So they're looking at this, but they are also holders of extraordinarily good data about the investment that is made and the costs that we bear with health. So what I'm trying to do is put these two things together. And so we're starting to do some research projects with with those who have the ability to very broadly put an intervention into the market. So a health insurer like Bupa has millions of customers, and so they have access to make change quickly. And so for me, coming from I guess the business school side of things, and in the other entities that I've worked in, my areas looking at, well, what is disruption, what different business models would occur, working with those who can make a big change quickly is very appealing. But in saying that, they need to have evidence-based products and services. And sometimes as researchers, we're not really good enough. We're not all that awesome at actually providing that in a way that the consumer, be it a Bupa or an early aged care or Anglicare, or an individual like me who wants to live longer, to be able to access that in a way that makes really great sense to me. So that's where I flipped to thinking, well, what can I do to make this work more? And so I'd started to pull together from a user point of view how I might articulate the types of health span interventions. Where are what's the research showing that the two distinctions are, that one is easy to understand and one that has a medical assistance required? Because in my work I'm doing, say with my company Accent, we're building off medical technologies that apply nanotechnology to breath sensing for disease. I'm just applying that in agriculture, right? So I understand the role of and the need to look at medical assistance. It's not simply saying that everyone exercise more. So there are natural interventions, and this is just from my conceptualization based on research of the two sides of this, because from a consumer point of view, it's easier to understand where things fit. What are the different boxes? So interventions that we're looking for that we know will expand health span are these kind of natural interventions, you know, sleep, happiness, which is again a bit of a pet research project of mine, obviously, sociality, nutrition, exercise and movement, and external environment. I did notice today on the news, there's this whole thing now about getting people who are in isolation, they can't hug a person, so go hug a tree. I sort of figure that's both cute, quaint, and probably right on the money. So I don't know if anyone else has traveled in Japan to do tree bathing and forest bathing, but I think there's some really interesting and fun stuff that come into the natural interventions. But where I think is really exciting, but the hardest often to prove effect, is what I'm terming medically assisted interventions. And this is where there is some extraordinary, brilliant, and I'm hoping that you guys are connected into, tech development that is able to change the way we age entirely. But it's often hardest to communicate to those who need to use it, or there's regulatory issues or there's challenges in getting that to market. What I want to be able to do is say, well, this is an articulation of this, and I'd love to get some thoughts on how people feel and perceive this. But the next step is to go, well, why is this relevant now? And why is it relevant globally? And for me, this image shows it very quickly that this is a really significant issue, because that's the color change that shows that we were younger and then the world is rapidly aging. Now, I'm sure most of you guys know that. But what that also means, as you probably also know, is disease is rapidly increasing and the cost of this is massive. So you can understand that what we're seeing is a convergence of societal need, aging communities, technology, the internet of medical devices and medical things. And so I think it's a really fascinating, interesting time to try and find models that actually bring this to life, rather than it seems at times that there's a lot happening, but not necessarily enough translation. So this is my effort and going, well, how do we translate this into accessibility to individuals? So this comes from one of my little courses, you know, the challenge is to go, we've got the idea, we've got to build the bridge so we can get happy people. And right now, the opportunity to do that is things like using the digital marketplace. Each year when I run the Global Executive MBA program, I do the disruptive innovations thing, the technology, and I take the cohort to the US. Well, that's a bit off the cards for the moment. But what I do is look at where greater disruption is occurring, and we focus on that. So we've done green tech, we did Reimagining Aging this last January, and the next one will be reimagining the consumer experience. Because we're digitizing so much of our relationship with consumer behavior, but also as a consumer, there's been a shift, and you probably all noticed this more through COVID. Yeah, you probably went online a bit, but now there is a different relationship with how we get goods, and people have, there's some really amazing new technology that's changing the consumer experience. And so for me, it spun me into saying, well, what is the role of an online platform? How would this work? What's the opportunity to build this bridge that says, if you've got a double-sided marketplace, I'm hoping I've made a case that says that there's a pull factor, because there's the aging workplace, aging individuals, etc. And there's the other side of that, which is there is a really strong, I think, terribly exciting drawing in of new technologies. But we're going to need a whole pile of these platforms in the middle to bridge that gap. And this is what I'm trying to do and trying to work out how the best way of doing that is. So what I've done is, this is a draftish version of a website. Oh, I'll skip verification. Hopefully this will come up. I may have to log back in, or I can just go to my second version. There we go. Can you guys see my healthspan website? Great, got thumbs up. Thank you. So what I've tried to do here, and I recognize I want to have lots of time for questions if there are some, and I'll give you the link to do this. So at the moment it's password protected because I'm just developing it, because I really want input into how would this work for people bring tech or research to market, because I've set it up in a way that is at the moment a blend of what a consumer would look at, and understanding that these are areas we could build more information around. But the principle here is to be able to create an online place where people can have an aggregated market of research and evidence-based products that are around these categories in particular. And the reality is there is nothing there, because I'm really at that point of going, I want to co-develop with those who are developing products. I mean, I could put my breast sensing technology out there for cows, but that's not going to work. What I want is for humans, right? So looking at how I want to work with people that for this is an advantage. So one of the downsides in some ways of the new digital marketplace is, if you're an inventor, what you think is now you can just go to anyone yourself, right? So you can just go directly to market. The challenge is the cost of acquisition is still high, because you've now got 20,000 other new tech devices all trying to get into the head of Bupa or the head of some procurement, because you want to sell them your product. What I realize is that's actually, as a startup, really hard and costly to do. So I'm trying to think of, well, how can we aggregate this and make it much easier? Because I've already got, because of my previous business things, connections into some of those places, and we should be making it easier for them, faster, so that as an inventor or a tech developer of some sort, you keep doing the thing you do best, and we make the path to market for evidence-based products smoother. And as part of that, what I've been doing, because I'm cynical about all the claims that anyone makes on any of these things, is setting up research partnerships and relationships with entities like Ality Aged Care and others who are really keen to be part of trials where they would effectively be your potential customer, but you trial it with them first, and then to be able to use that trial as a platform to be able to then go to this kind of model that says, we can now, here's a case study, this is what we do with Ality. Ality loves what we do. Ality is for those who don't know, a private equity owned aged care, which is always interesting to have that kind of model, because they're really much more attentive to the bottom line. They actually do make money in this market, which is really rare, but they will also want to be innovators. And so looking for places where we can provide the evidence in a way that the consumer understands, not just a regulator, or that it shows effect and output for quality of life, not just a change in a metric around amorbidity. So we're looking at other metrics that look at this thing about health span, and it's not just about aged care, because aged care is that age extent of life that is difficult, but looking at it from the 45 and up. So this is what I'm sort of putting together, and I'm really keen to get some insights or some conversation generated about both sides of this. One is the research around age-related identity, if people have interest in that. And the other is looking at developing what I'm trying to do with my healthspan.com, but doing that with people for whom this could be a helpful path to market, and where doing trials with potential customers would be a way of getting, one, evidence that you need, but two, rapidly getting you through to the market, because we need these products that are coming online to do the good thing that they are designed to do as quickly as possible. So that's my way of looking at this, and trying to think about new ways of looking at the consumer-driven approach to innovation and technology adoption, and thinking of different platforms I can use. So I really love any questions or comments or thoughts.
I'm clapping.
Yes.
Yeah, let me hand over quickly to Andrew. I have questions as well, but Andrew can go first for sure.
Oh, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Bronwyn. That was fantastic. And probably I wouldn't mind having a separate catch up with you for a few conversations. But let me give you a thumbnail of.
I'd love to.
So I did the EMBA 6-7 years ago, something like that.
Yep. Yep.
But that's one thing. So I'm now, and I've been at the university for a long time, but I'm at Westmeads, where I'm running a thing called the Living Lab, and am involved in standing up the Westmead Innovation Centre, which is part of the redevelopment that's happened out there. And the kind of thing that you're describing is exactly one of the areas in which we'd like to be able to operate, which is, at Westmead, like all across the university, and this will be part of what Adam wants to say, I think. There are lots of people trying to generate apps and, translate research into these kinds of products. And what we don't have is a really good framework for validating them, testing them, and doing that for external things as well. So part of the focus of the Innovation Centre, I think, will be heavily around digital health. And we'd love to be able to kind of, if not sort of do exactly some of that stuff that you were describing, at least support that, which is how can we provide some evidence for things that we generate and even help test other things that other people want to generate. So that sense of exchange, then, the sort of marketplace of digital health products and other sorts of things, I think it's a great idea. And so, yes, love to talk about that some more. One of the two other just quick things. So one is part of what the Living Lab is focused on is trying to get more into that preventative space. So how do you think about health and wellness rather than the medical side? And so some of those things that you talked about that are non-medical interventions that are around nutrition and environment and activity are things that I'm very much interested in as well. And the idea of having an Internet of Things and being able to generate data and understand people's environment and let that help people make decisions about what they do, I think is also really an opportune space to do things in. And, we've got a couple of projects that we're trying to start around air quality sensing and how you can convey that data to people, etc. And so there's a group at the university that it runs a New South Wales smart sensing network, and that might be an interesting tie-in at some point as well. But then the last thing I was going to say is we have a lifespan research network at the university as well. And I was in a conversation with them the other day about, and they're clear that they're about lifespan rather than life course, in the same way that you're thinking about health span. One of the things that came up in that conversation is that often there's an event that triggers people to, either that sort of gentle trajectory of health, it'll take a step change for one reason or another, right? And you started the story with your grandkids. And so that's a moment where, you realize something different or something actually changes. People have some, life event. If you're a mother having a child, or you lose a job, or you have an injury, or something happens, right? And you have this sort of step change. And so whether that's part of something to think about as well, that, there are triggers for people starting to think about these things. So that's just another idea, I suppose. So I rambled without asking you any real questions, but I think what you're doing is awesome. So.
Well, thank you. I'd love to catch up, Andrew. We'll make sure we do that offline. That would be really good.
Okay, great.
And I wanted to ask a question as well, if I may, but it actually wasn't the question that Andrew was thinking I was going to ask. I mean, I guess one of the things that I come from pure research, and translation is certainly not something that I am an expert in at all. But one of the things that I really am interested in is how we turn evidence into practice, and how we make sure that the things that we develop, and it might be the design team out at Westmead that develops something that is evidence-based, that we know is cost-effective, that should work, but those aren't the things that exist in the marketplace. And I always wonder about this gap between us producing evidence to show that something is great and works, and what actually gets used in practice. And there's often a big gap between those two things. And I was kind of struck by the way you described the difference between us producing evidence as researchers and academics versus the things that consumers need and want, and the things that facilitate the growth or the uptake of those things. Anyway, I was struck by the way you described it, and I was interested in how you see the difference between those.
Yeah, often what it is, I'll give you an example of the need for co-creation. And co-creation is something that is not just about functionality, it's about design as well. And often as researchers and as tech developers, what we do is we go for functionality really importantly, and we want to make it a bit nice and sexy at the end. But there is a downside to that. And that is you competing with a marketplace with no evidence that makes it hot and sexy first, super easy, and part of a social network or part of your club kind of behavior. So if I had my Oura ring that I'd put it on, it's sort of a bit of a funky thing for the young people. It's the way it's sort of sold in some ways, but it's okay, but there'll be more effective technology, and probably that has more evidence. So that is a good one. I was talking to the guys at Ality the other day, which is aged care, and they said Sony had spent millions of dollars on creating a TV remote that you could clean really well. And so from a hygiene point of view, brilliant tech design, absolutely fantastic. No old person could find the buttons any longer, and so they couldn't use it. So all the evidence for its functionality as something that could be cleaned well, fitted with hygiene requirements, actually, they'd never given it actually to a person with dementia in their 80s to try and use it. And so there is a need to build that bridge and to be able to get people involved earlier. And so this use factor co-design of technology is really important, because what we see as key factors for consideration to make something effective may actually only be part of the consumer heart and soul story that means that they want to use it. So another example is there's a lot of technology that now for older people that they can wear that can keep them alive. So my mother has them. She won't wear them or use them because they're very effective, but old people wear that stuff, right? So we need to understand and engage with the whole person, not just the solution to the problem. And I think there's a lot more we can do as developers of solutions to look at how that works. And in this sector, it's made even a little more complicated, because it might not just be when you've got someone who is an older person with levels of cognition, it may be their family that you're actually selling a product to. So your casting of evidence and your presentation of that evidence is very different. So they may be having actually their motivation to buy might be quite different. And you might have nursing staff, they're the ones that administer it. So it's a complex scenario, and functionality actually is not the story. And that's why often products with much less evidence seem to get this take up, because they address those other factors.
Okay, great. Is there anybody else with a question that's jumping out at the moment? Feel free to just unmute yourself and yell out if you have one.
Far away. Or even a comment, I don't mind. What you think about all this stuff.
Seems like everybody's gone quiet, which is probably a good sign. It means that they're either thinking and not sure, or it was so clear that they're so that's great.
I'll ask another question.
Yeah, I can ask something too. Go ahead.
No, you go, Anne. I've already rambled.
No, I'm just curious. It was really good to hear what you were talking about, Andrew, what's going on at Westmead. Because I've been working with Bronwyn for a couple months now, just trying to figure out what the lay of the land is in Australia in particular. Certainly it's much more advanced in the US and the UK. And I'm just interested if anybody else has heard of any of these initiatives focused on the health span side of things. I mean, there's lots of initiatives, as Bronwyn said, for the whack-a-mole stuff for Parkinson's or dementia or falls, or, you know, they're piecemeal approaches. But I haven't heard much about healthspan. I'm just wondering if anybody else has. No. Well, that's good. That's part of the research.
No, I mean, there are things, there are some initiatives around aging, I think, I would say. I mean, I'm aware of a thing in South Australia, the Centre for Modern Aging, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple of other sort of living labs around health, but so part of the you know, the philosophy of the living lab is that it is about that co-design that you're talking about, having full stakeholder involvement at the beginning. So you've got patients and carers and families and academics and health professionals, industry, government, whoever else you need in that co-design piece from the get-go. So there are a few things, but not many. And like you say, Anne, I think most of the time it's in the medical space rather than the more preventative health space. It's just kind of hard to drag. It's hard to drag the medical profession back that way, I think. And then the people that are thinking about the health side tend to be a bit more in the sort of social science space, where it's a different kind of view of things. You know, what are the sort of intergenerational things that happen around economic circumstance or issues like that, I suppose. And so there's this funny crossover space between social science and public health that I think is slightly, you know, vacant at this point. And I guess that's the question I was going to ask then, is the sort of one person to many. There are a few products out there that are trying to come up with a sort of individualized plan for a personal well-being approach, if you want. You know, large companies are plugging those sorts of things into their HR system. How do you find a series of products that will help you exercise more regularly or whatever? So there are things that build up from an individual perspective, but I haven't seen anything before that is this more general marketplace for where it's kind of beholden on the consumer if you want to go and look at it and ask some questions. So I don't know whether how you make that as easy as possible for the consumer even to know what it is that they're looking for and what they want. And that's part of the challenge at the moment, right?
Yeah, look, it is part of the challenge at the moment. And so part of the, for me, providing one of the questions I've been asked by those, the insurers side of things, health insurance through to life insurance, is they would like to be able to offer more, because they already know their consumers so well, a curated range of products, but they don't know where to go for that. So there's too much obfuscation. Oh, I never get that word right. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and not enough, again, clarity around exactly what products do what and what they could do. Because so they have that, and you're absolutely right. And they've all been developing these apps and metrics to be able to identify what a personal plan would be. So their challenge is it's not all solved by a Fitbit, and that seems to be the easy go-to type of here's a bit of tech, here's a Fitbit, we'll monitor now and see how many steps you take. Where I'd like to think we can ramp that up to a much more sophisticated level, actually underpinned by real science and evidence-based research. So I think you're right there, which is why I haven't been interested in pursuing that so much, because I'm just not convinced that's the gap. I think the gap is actually the provision of the right device or right technology or right service, and that those with access to that very deep personal information are the best placed to develop the tools that say this is the outcome that could be achieved. What I'm trying to do is make it a rough to smooth experience for them to access that.
Yep.
And Andrew just popped the link in the chat there as well, which Anne's seen. So
Great.
Question.
Only a few minutes left.
Yes, there was another question.
Hi, my name's Cynthia, and I work in the respiratory field. I was wondering, have you ever thought about a way to get to the consumer might also be through the healthcare professional?
Oh, absolutely. And that's definitely Anne's background in putting together health networks of health professionals. And we've been exploring the idea of creating a specific health span medical provider option. And what we've been looking at for me is doing some initial research around the likelihood who's really interested in doing this? GPs are definitely overwhelmed by this. What we're finding is, and the relationship with technology is not as strong as, say, sports doctors. And so we've been finding that from a medical, because many of these things will be medically assisted, I think we need to look at a medical network of sorts. And I've been talking with Allied aged care about that. Is this something that would be useful? And their view was that would be really important.